Hi, welcome to the fourth episode of Ngobrol Bareng Seribu Tujuan. I'm here with, please introduce yourself.
My name is Rohan Borschmann. I'm a psychologist and a senior research fellow at the University of Melbourne.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about the work that you do here before we delve into the questions?
Sure. So a lot of the work that I do focuses on the mental health of young people, particularly the long-term mental health of young people who experience certain hardships or certain life events. As a psychologist, I'm interested in the life course trajectory of mental health. So.
Okay. All right, so we're going to delve into the questions. Your interests in your research, one of them lies in self-harm during the teenagers specifically. So I wanted to know what sort of prompted your interest in that age group specifically.
Well, I used to work in London on at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College on a project that was looking at self-harm in adults, so a little bit older, and it was fascinating to me and it was quite new to me. But I realised pretty quickly that self-harm is very much an adolescent onset type of behaviour in most cases. And so eventually I moved back to Australia and worked at the Centre for Adolescent Health at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And just moved into working with adolescents as opposed to working with adults. It was a bit of a natural progression.
So it was important because it's where it started. You're saying that the onset of behaviour started in adolescence.
Yeah, I mean, self-harm typically has an onset between the age of about 11 and 13, and it peaks at around about 15 and starts to decline towards the 20s. So it's very much usually an adolescent onset behaviour.
Okay. Are there, with that, are there any specific factors into which, like the group in that age group that's more,
more prone?
To.
So we find that kids who have persistent emotional difficulties, symptoms of depression, anxiety, are more likely to self-harm than their peers who don't. Also, young people who engage in substance use at a very early age and perhaps have had difficult family lives or certain things that we call adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Quite often things like sexual assault at a young age or childhood maltreatment or abuse is more likely to lead to that kind of thing.
Okay. From your research also on suicide and self-harm in young people, can you talk a little bit about sort of the long-term outcomes of people that self-harm that didn't lead to suicide?
Sure, that didn't lead to suicide. Okay, so some of the research that we've done has shown that young people who self-harm during the teenage years are much more likely in the 20s and even in their 30s to have a whole range of adverse outcomes. So these can include things like higher rates of mental health problems, depression and anxiety, high rates of substance use, even as old as 35 years old, which is 20 years after potentially self-harming. Higher rates of unemployment, lower rates of things like being in a long-term loving relationship or owning a home, achieving school completion, things like that. So there's a whole range of things that it's starting to become evident that self-harm is linked to. And we're not saying that it's causal, but certainly there are some pretty bad outcomes for adolescent self-harm.
The factors that are related to suicide and self-harm, which was substance use and like early, I wanted to know if there are ways to catch it at that very young age. Is there any, behavioral symptoms that we can catch, or what can we do to help people in those?
So that's a really good question, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment. We've got a study going at the moment where we've got kids aged between 8 and 16. We're following them up each year, and we've seen already that they're starting to self-harm at around 11, 12 years old. But by identifying the factors that are consistent with people who self-harm at that age, such as emotional difficulties, problems concentrating in class, peer conflict, so either perpetrating or being victims of bullying, lots of arguments, ups and downs with their friends, more than you'd expect from kids that age. Those are the kind of things that we can identify young people who are at risk of self-harm. From there, we don't exactly know the next step, but hopefully we can link them into appropriate mental health care and services that might divert them from self-harm into something else. So one of the reasons that people self-harm is because they don't have access to more appropriate adaptive coping strategies. So they turn to self-harm because it does serve a purpose for them in that moment. We would see it as quite a maladaptive behaviour, but it does serve a purpose. So if we can equip them with additional strategies, hopefully they can move away from the self-harm.
I guess for us, for people that be watching this, if we see, people with, or children with symptoms that are like that, can we do anything? Because we're not professionals. Sometimes we don't really know how to approach it. Sometimes we just.
I think the first thing really is just talking about it. So opening up a conversation with the person that you're concerned about them. Is there anything that you can do to help them? And then if possible and appropriate, you could link them in with medical care, mental health care. But I think just breaking down the stigma and the taboo of self-harm and mental health in general is the really important first step. So if you see someone that's experiencing some obvious difficulties, instead of shying away from it or pretending it's not happening, the first best step will be to talk to them about it and see if there's anything you can do to help. Sometimes just listening is the best thing.
So it's okay to talk about it. Like you shouldn't be embarrassed about it.
It's certainly nothing to be embarrassed about, and you talking to them might be the first step in them getting help and going on to a better sort of life.
I think I wanted to go back for a little bit to your research. I guess I wanted to know what was the most surprising, or like the most, I didn't think that this was happening, but it is happening. Like is there anything that you found?
I suppose the age of onset for self-harm was quite disturbing when I initially found that out, because up until a few years ago we'd all sort of thought that we knew self-harm peaked at around 15, 16 years old and then went down towards the 20s, but we didn't really know when it started. And the only reason we knew that was because of previous research that we'd done, which showed that at age 15, 16, 8-10% of young people reported self-harming. But it was a bit of a black box before then. So the study I mentioned a few minutes ago, where we've tracked kids from the age of 8, we started asking them at age 11 about self-harm. And we've seen that already sort of 3-4% around that age have reported self-harming in the past 12 months. So as a parent myself of young kids, it's quite a reality check for how young people are starting this potentially deadly behaviour.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, this is just what I think, because when you were young, you didn't think that people would do things like that. You would think that like they're still playing, they're still, their life shouldn't be that hard, and I think that's the stigma.
Absolutely.
Around it.
Kids shouldn't have to deal with things like that.
Yeah.
And I suppose one really important thing is that it's potentially a deadly behaviour. Yeah. Even if they're not intending to die, every time someone self-harms, there's a risk they might die. Yeah. So, that might not even be in the minds of the person doing it. Yeah. And I'm sure sometimes people do sadly die unintentionally from self-harm. So it's a really obvious good reason to try and invest in, diverting people away from self-harm.
Especially when they're young. I think they don't really think about consequences when they're doing it.
No, of course.
Yeah. I think that's the number one important takeaway in this video, is like young people are also struggling.
Definitely.
And you shouldn't belittle them just because they're young, because sometimes I think that's worse almost, when you're young and you know that like I'm young and I don't know who I can talk to.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they would think that it's no big deal.
Yeah, and you might need a parent to access mental health care or normal health care, I'm not sure, but childhood's tough, People think kids have got it easy, they just go to school and play with their friends, but they've got challenging peer relationships to navigate, they've got school tests, they might move house, they've got brothers and sisters to contend with. Things are not as easy for kids as people think they are. So,
just a curious question. I think for parents that might be watching this, how do you approach a subject that's difficult? Such
as self-harm?
Yes. How do you talk to your children about it, or how do you possibly encourage your children to talk about it?
Sure. So that's a really good question, and I guess the most important thing is to not be judgmental ever. If you're suspecting something or you discover something about a young person, it doesn't work to shout at them to stop, make them promise you that they're going to stop, make bargains with them or bribes, things like that. Certainly not judging them negatively or telling them that there's nothing nothing wrong with their life.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this kind of behaviour?
Yeah.
Because none of that matters to the
Yeah.
person who's doing it. So you really want to be supportive in the first instance. You want to let them know that you're available, you're there, you're not judging them, you're just concerned.
Yeah.
You're just trying to help them. So you'll very quickly turn people off if you do any of the other things that I mentioned and admonish them. But if you can just open up a dialogue, let them know that you're caring and you're supportive, that's the first step. And from there, who knows where it can go. But if you do the other thing, it will just shut down.
Yeah.
And they'll become more secretive.
Yeah. Okay, yes. So from the research that you've been doing for the past 5 to 10 years, have you seen any changes, especially with the rise of internet and social media that young people are on these days?
Yes, we have actually seen a rise in self-harm in a lot of countries. In Australia, England, for example, have reported recent rises in self-harm. It's quite disturbing. There was some research last year out of England that showed that from young women aged 16 to 24, 1 in 5 reported self-harming at some stage in their life, which is much higher than it was a decade earlier. It's around about 10%. And I'm sure that social media and internet use is playing a role in that. I'm sure there are other factors as well, but the thing about social media is that there's a lot of opportunity for self-other comparison, obviously, and so as you know, everybody's only putting up, usually on social media, the best elements of their life, the best aspects of their life. So if you've got a lot of friends on social media, there's always going to be someone who's on holiday putting up great photos, there's going to be someone who's at the gym having a great workout, somebody's at a party, somebody's having a lovely dinner with their lovely partner and everything's perfect. You know, even though those pictures have usually been curated and carefully chosen many times over. So it's very easy when you're just sitting there in your bedroom to think, well, why am I not doing these wonderful things? There must be something wrong with me. You know, and so that can lead to perhaps an increased likelihood in having some sort of mental health problems like anxiety or depression. It's more common in girls than it is in boys. I think part of that might be the way that girls use the internet compared to boys. So young boys do a lot of gaming, for example, which involves here and now immediate contact with their friends. You know, they're quite often talking on headpieces and stuff, so there's no delay. With women, if they're using social media, even a delay of a few seconds or a few minutes, if you're putting something up and not getting any feedback, that can start to create doubt. Is that the right thing to do? So that can lead to things like anxiety in young people, especially if they don't have the strategies to deal with that kind of thing. So.
I think we just wanted to ask also from your end, is there any, from your work, or is there anything that you want to highlight in this video? Are there other things that we haven't talked about that you would like to highlight?
Just that self-harm is a really common behaviour. It's, like I said, it's not a very adaptive coping strategy, but it's really common. Like I said, up to 1 in 5 young women in England have reported it recently, around 1 in 10 young people in Australia. So, on that basis alone, it's likely that you'll probably know someone who is self-harmed, or you'll know someone who knows someone who's self-harmed. So just bringing it out of the darkness of stigma and discrimination, I think, is a really important first step.
So that's it. That's a very insightful conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll link his works under the description below, so you can actually check it out and give it a read, because I think it would be very important, especially for us that are young. So again, thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, and share this video. And thank you.